Hello and welcome to this week's Property Matters, the show that brings global trends to an Irish audience to help shape your knowledge of the industry. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your hosts today are myself, Carol Tallon, and beside me is Bryan Fox.
Thanks, Carol. And we have an interesting lineup ahead with some great guests, and we hope we'll show with a different side of the property market. But I think we should look first at some of the big property stories of the past week. And it was interesting. Most of these stories were covered in all the national media, but the median asking price for new home sales is 271k or 1,000, which is quite accurate nationally, and 380,000 in Dublin. That's according to the latest residential property price report from myhome.ie. So obviously a significant drop in the asking price for new home sales. And then looking at and then on top of that as well, there's a rise in the number of new mortgage approvals in February, which is interesting, despite the fact that the median price is coming down. The other aspect too, in terms of renting, is that rents have risen nationally by 7%, and there is signs that rate is slowing down. That's coming from the rental, the RTB. 1 in 10 people spending over 60% of an income on rent in Ireland, which is a hugely significant number. And of course the on-running story is, most people are quite well aware of this, Housing Minister Owen Murphy has described as deeply shocking that the combined number of homeless people is now at 10,000. And living in emergency accommodation in Ireland, a significant rise to 277 people from January. The other interesting story from our point of view, Carol, is this one that's just, I think it came out yesterday, as Dunleer Rathdown County Council has decided to drop ongoing plans for travel housing in Mount Merrion here, quite close to where we're stationed here. And Josephine Madigan, actually, in her, she has often been highlighted as part of the decision because of the fact that in running for the local election, she actually inserted that in her publicity. You know, so go ahead. And
it only took 3 decades to say no. So I'm calling that a win.
It's a win.
So one of the interesting things that came out, contrary to perceptions, the rate of home ownership in the Republic corresponds very closely with the international average, according to the OECD, and also some good news for the industry, or mixed news, I suppose, for the industry. The price of development sites steadies as the build costs are starting to bite, and this is before we know what the Brexit uncertainty is going to bring. Going back to the Journal, they actually reported on what they quoted as a national scandal. Now, the government and the Housing Minister in particular actually defended the housing record, but has said that we need more landlords. A local Dublin story, Cairn Homes gets the go ahead. They had planning for 22 houses in Rathgar. They can now go ahead with 107 apartments instead, which will be good news for the market there if in fact they go to buyers and investors locally, as opposed to going in a job lot from on the investment side of things. So one of the interesting things that came up this week, Dublin City Council favours a radical new housing model. Now, it's favouring this model, which is called a Vienna model, and it's a move away from home ownership, more towards a cost rental model. Now, what I would recommend to anybody who has an interest in this, the Vienna model of housing will be the subject of a month-long exhibition taking place from, it starts on the 1st of April and it runs through to the 25th at the CHQ in Dublin's Docklands. It's also available in the Rediscovery Centre in Ballymun and in the Richmond Barracks in Inchicore. So I recommend, if this is something you have an interest in, go along and take a look at that. So, in studio.
Well, let's look at this new segment. We'll start. This is to do with reporting from the Oireachtas this week, and I suppose one of the more interesting ones that happened this afternoon was a joint committee meeting on finance, public expenditure and reform, and the Taoiseach. It was a very interesting meeting in that the background background to this bill is called a no consent, no sale bill. It's actually proposed by the party's finance spokesperson, and the Dáil has voted in the past, I think it was back in January, in favour of a proposed Sinn Féin bill, as I say, to restrict banks from selling residential mortgages without the written consent of the borrower. Now, the problem with this one is that it's been reported that the central bank warned the Department of Finance that the bill could trigger unintended consequences, such as an increase in interest rates. Now, there was a lot of discussion on this. There was a lot of representatives from various parties at the committee meeting this afternoon, and John McGinley was very bullish in relation to representing the homeowner or the home buyer. And I must say the central bank was very much on the defence in relation to how the banks are dealing with homeowner or home buyers, should I say, at the moment. So it'll be very interesting. They were pressed at the very end in terms of getting clarity from the central bank on whether or not this is unconstitutional, and they batted off by saying that's the responsibility of the Attorney General. I didn't want to go into that territory, but they did sort of, in a oblique sort of way, agree that it could be unconstitutional. Now, I just wanted to look at another bill as well, which has been discussed in the Dáil, and that is this one called. Let me see, I have it here now.
I love this. There's so much being discussed.
There's so many houses. And I mean, it's a very good idea, because I mean there is an awful lot of business now in relation to various aspects of property in the Dáil. This one is called the Residential Tenancies Amendment 2018. It's an act. It's a bill actually to amend the Residential Territories Acts of 2004 to 2016 to provide for powers to carry out investigations of landlords and impose administrative sanctions, to provide for offences in relation to non-compliance with rent increase restrictions and rent pressure zones, and to increase the notice periods to be provided in the case of a termination of a tenancy by a landlord, to provide for annual registration by landlords of tenancies, and to amend the registration process to provide also for mandatory publication of termination orders by the Residential Tenancies Board, and to provide for related matters. Now, it was very interesting. It was a very short-lived discussion in the Seanad, because all of the parties agreed to it. Now, there is one sort of hiccup in relation to it, and that is that they are not quite sure how to deal with people that have not engaged with banks. And that is one of the. I'm not going through the various clauses now, because there's quite a number of them. We just don't have the time. But if anybody's interested in looking at the bill, it's clause number 4, which to matters which the court have regard for the purpose of subsection, including the following. And I won't go through the following.
Okay, Bryan, what stage is that at?
It's only committee stage. Well, it's going to committee stage, and it's as I say, it has to go back to the Dáil. Has an enormous journey to take before it becomes into law. But it has been very interesting from the point of view, and it also brings in the PIPs as well, the personal insolvency arrangements and all that. All I'm going to say is that the discussion itself was all party agreement on it, and as such it was very interesting from the point of view of trying to amend the legislation to look after those that are in trouble and have been, have gone to the courts about it and doing the right thing about it, but also trying to appease those that haven't. Okay. So that's it for this week. We'll have more next week as well.
Okay, you might bring us just a watching brief on that maybe next week as well. Thank you, Bryan. Okay, so our first guest in studio today is Garry Connolly, founder and president of Host in Ireland. Garry, you're very welcome to Property Matters today.
Thank you so much for the invite.
And Garry, you might just explain, because over the last number of weeks, data centres in the context of the construction industry, it's been in the news quite a lot. So you might just explain what exactly Host in Ireland is, or what it does.
I suppose to better get an understanding of what the Host in Ireland does, you have to understand what the asset class we're dealing with. So I guess data centres have been around in different guises since we had a floppy disk, and even before that we had a hard disk. So if you can imagine, to the listeners, back in the 80s you had a floppy disk, in the 90s you had a fob, maybe even a CD-ROM in between. They're all disappeared, and you wonder, well, where have they gone? They've actually gone to a data centre. So when you're actually talking about a data centre, you're actually talking about all that media that you used to use in a central location, otherwise called a cloud.
Okay, so all the talk about the cloud actually is situated somewhere.
The cloud is actually something physical, and it starts with your handset, it starts with your device, it then goes through your wireless connection, and where the data rests, where it's stored, where it's exported, where it's manipulated, is in a server, and that's in a data centre. And when you think about data, you then automatically think about Ireland. And when you think about Ireland, and particularly for the large customers who are growing constantly, the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Googles, you think about the forefathers of them, IBM, Digital, Nixdorf. They've been in Ireland for 70 years. You know, Dell, Gateway, all these other companies came after them, Informix. So the relationship with data-related jobs, data-related services, and Ireland goes back 70 years. And therefore, the evolution of the floppy disk, as I say, is now the cloud. The cloud needs centres to live in, and that's why Ireland, or should I say the Metro Dublin, is now recognised as the largest data centre cluster in Europe, bar none. So that's an important thing when we're talking to people about, you know, this new industry. It's actually just the newest manifestation of the data industry.
Garry, most people associate data centres now with specific companies like Google and Yahoo, but are there others then involved with centres?
Yeah, of course. You know, they're the big shiny pins. They're like the pennies and the big brands. But you've got so many of the other guys who are smaller and more concessionary, if you were doing the analogy of retail.
Okay.
But what's very important is that not all data is the same. Different types of data need different types of centres.
Can I ask you to explain that, actually?
Yeah. Well, if you consider, you know, if you started a new business today, there is absolutely no way that the venture capitalists or others are going to give you money to buy servers and buy software and buy all that. You would go automatically to an Amazon, Google, Microsoft, or an as a service. Why? Because the risk of failure is very high, and they don't want to be left with a load of tin and capital tied up. So that's why the Airbnbs of this world, by the Ubers and that, they have just been born on the cloud. Okay. They don't own that much kit.
Can you rent then from?
But that's what you're doing.
That's what you're doing.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Netflix, for instance. When you consider, I'm often asked about Netflix, Airbnb, Uber, and all the rest of it. They live in one of the Amazon or the Microsoft data centers. They're virtually renting space. They're virtually renting, and it's the optimum way. It's the new way of doing things as a service, as I need it. Therefore, you don't over purchase, deploy capital when you don't need it. But there's a whole lot of old data that is private data that's, you know, in companies that they don't want to migrate automatically onto Amazon or Google or one of those platforms. And that's why, to answer your question, like retail, there are different sizes. There are ones that are like IKEA. If I bring that retail analogy, IKEA will be an Amazon or a Google. They design their own, they build their own, they operate their own. Then you've got other guys who just want to get data away from their own premises, but they don't want to design and build their own, and they go to a likes of an Equinix or an Interaction or a Digital Realty, where they'll rent a room to you, or they'll rent a rack to you. So depending on your data.
What sounds a rack?
A rack is like a door frame with a lot of servers.
Oh,
it's your private area.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like a safety deposit box
for your data. Effectively, it's a great analogy, because what we talk about often is sort of, well, why would you not have your data in a secure, bomb-proof, 24/7 security location when you could have it on your own premises? Well, the reality is you go home at 5 o'clock, and that's your business sitting in the corner for a security guard or for a cleaning person or some unauthorised person to literally put them under their arm. So you've got the economics of it, and you've also the physical security of
protection.
The physical security.
But I presume a huge amount of this is the change in data loads as well. So, for example, these companies that you're talking about, it's not their data. They're holding their clients' data or their consumers' data or their partners, their business partners' data.
They're providing a platform for you to actually then rent, and the same way as a landlord would rent you your space within the four walls of your private area. You do what you want. You're responsible for your data. They're providing you with the platform. So that brings us into the centre itself. You know, I'm so glad we started with that discussion, because often people forget that these are the factories of the current industrial revolution, and it's recognised that we're now well into the fourth industrial revolution. And whereas the first one and the second one was all about coal and steel and steam, the second one was all about automation, the third one was all about actual computers and automation. Now what we're in is that every industry in every sector, micro or macro is defined by data. So guess what? Everybody is generating data. Everybody's making decisions on data, and they have to go somewhere, and that's a centre.
So how does this apply now to real estate?
Well, it's data centres now are recognised as a genuine asset class. So where you had before, let's call it the dot-com bubble, where we had a run at this before, the centres themselves were big and strong and all the rest, but we didn't have enough devices to actually generate the content. We had Nokia 5310 mobile phones. Knock yourself out with 1 billion text messages. In terms of your direct question, in the same way, we're evolving now into the second and third generation of data centres, and now it's been recognised as part of fundamental infrastructure. So what you're starting to see very much is that now that the money guys realise this is not going away, you've got the same groups that are investing in bridges, rail, road, and other forms of real estate investing in data centres, because it's the
data centres were proposed to become or to be classed as strategic infrastructure last year. Did that happen?
Yeah,
particularly in terms of planning. So, for example,
upscale of the really, really, really big ones.
Okay,
it's still going through the process of being seen as a strategic infrastructure. Okay, but it's interesting. The reason that happened was because of a number of issues with regard to Apple in Galway. But it's important always to note there was 300 megawatts of data centres in Ireland before Apple. There have been 300 megawatts of data centres after Apple, and there are now 600 more megawatts under development after Apple. So I mean, I think that we can all learn, both the purchaser and the location, as to the right way, in the right order, with the right people. And I think mistakes were made in a number of places, not just Ireland.
Guy, though, it all sounds very exciting, but what sort of, I mean, obviously you have to have a fairly good sized business to become involved with this, or what sort of...
That's an interesting question, because in any emerging space, you can either have you can have a unique selling point from your actual delivery model. You could be very lean yourself, and I think one of the things to remember is that the data center, this wave of data centers, started around 2012, and at a time in Ireland when companies were on their knees. The actual interesting thing was a lot of the big construction companies now, Tallon, Mercury, Ethos, the consultancy companies, even the new emerging QS companies like Mitchell McDermott or Kirby's, of these, they actually started to ramp up rapidly because they saw that data centers as an asset class was exportable. Because that's the other thing, is that there's really probably maximum in the world 10 companies that are dominating this space: Microsoft, Google, Apple, Facebook, etc., and then the 3 guys over in APAC, which are companies that are bigger than those ones, but we don't see them. Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu. That's where we talk about Ireland. The real economic benefit to Ireland actually is multiple. The assets here mean that they have direct and indirect jobs. If you look at some of the manufacturing that goes on, you then have to look at, to your point, the Data Privacy Act. And actually what's more interesting isn't so much the whole data privacy and GDPR, it's actually the whole English-speaking common law. That's actually as important.
So we're running out of time. Where do you commit to this?
So what we do is we basically try and top and tail it to be able to demonstrate to the world that Ireland is an optimal place to rest your data. And data is what we spoke most about. And if you need to put your data into Europe, you put it into Ireland, and then ultimately, to keep the rain out, you got to build a centre. And that's our role. We try and bring together the whole community. So promote Ireland to bring data, and then promote the Irish people and the skills to export all over Europe.
I think that's a really interesting one in terms of the construction side of it, because am I right in saying that a lot of these data centres, they're essentially identical, so they're identical to each other for a particular client, which means, if you have a client and they have a data centre in Denmark, they say, well, we want exactly the same one in Ireland and exactly the same one in other parts of the world. So who's building those?
Yeah, in the main, your answer is right and wrong. Your answer is absolutely right if it's built within a certain sequence, but every iteration is becoming more and more efficient. Okay. When 70% of your operating expense is energy, every iteration of the centre becomes much, much more efficient, energy efficient. The second thing is that whoever has built the first and built the relationships, it's no different than if you got a contract to build in Dublin for a certain client and he was building all over Limerick, you're going to get first dibs.
But I'd imagine it goes beyond relationship to expertise, because this is such a niche area.
Yeah, these are the mission critical engines of what these businesses are doing. So therefore, when you actually build relationships and the guys know what they're doing and they know the criticalness of it, the kit is actually the easy bit. The assembly of it is actually the skill, and that's why you're seeing the likes of the McGinley and the consultants growing at such a pace. Excellent. All over Europe.
Excellent. Garry, we're going to, because this is such a huge issue and there's so many elements to break down, so for example, like you started with the data today, and we want to move on to the construction side of it. Actually, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be putting together a bit of a roundtable discussion on air here, where we're going to get experts from various parts feeding into the data centre sector, because we want to break this down. We want to understand it better, because I think it's one of the lesser known elements or sectors of the construction industry, and yet the growth potential is huge. So where are the figures landing for 2019?
This year will be similar to last year, where Ireland will be about 1% of the global demand, which is around 1.3 billion euros. Globally, there's 122 billion projected for data centres. There hasn't been such an asset class build on an ongoing basis since oil and gas, because oil and gas were a big part of the last industrial revolution. Data is the driver of this revolution, and that is sort of, at the moment, we're looking at around 1.2 to 1.3 billion.
We're small beer then, really, aren't we?
No, 1% is a fairly significant chunk when you consider we're not even 1% of the population of Europe.
Right.
Well, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a roundtable discussion about this, and we're going to break it down and see exactly what the potential and the future prospects are. So that was Garry Connolly. Thank you so much for coming in, founder and president of Host in Ireland. So next up, after a quick break, we'll be joined in studio by Joe McGinley, CEO of Iconic Offices.
Everything's fine on 93.9 Dublin South FM.
Okay, welcome back to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon, and Bryan Fox. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com.
Well, as I mentioned before the break, we have Joe McGinley now, who's CEO of Iconic Offices, and we're delighted to have you here, Joe. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Let me ask you I'm going to ask you about beginning this particular question. How do you go about identifying co-working trends within the office sector?
I suppose it's just looking around what we're seeing every day in the market in Dublin. So we have over 2,000 members in our buildings in Dublin. So I suppose they're the best possible people for feedback. We'd also attend a lot of international events as well as checking out what our European competitors are doing.
Yeah, well, you've hit my next question then, really, which is about trends, because I have friends that are working in London and New York in the legal and banking areas. And there seems now that banks are trying to get their office workers as much out of the office and work at home, as opposed to come into the expensive office and so forth in various parts of those cities. Is that an ongoing trend, do you think, around Ireland as such?
Yeah, no, definitely. So we're seeing a lot of companies who are using both remote working and then flexible workspace in tandem. So they would encourage their workers to use, like, for instance, a co-working space, but then give them the flexibility to work from home. So I think that's just a lot of what employees are looking for these days. They're looking for that flexibility from their employer, and they're looking to work on their own terms where possible. And that's has always been prevalent especially in the technology sector, and now we're seeing it with the competitive landscape. We're seeing that kind of spread into other sectors now too.
There's been changes all over, but actually what I'm going to do, Joe, I'm going to actually take you back about a decade, because when I first met you, you were in traditional estate agency about a decade ago, and those were difficult times. So really I'm interested to know what you saw a decade ago that maybe other estate agents in the same marketplace simply didn't see.
Well, a decade ago I would say that I didn't see anything at all, because before I started Iconic, I actually had two. I was a partner in one estate agency practice, and then I had my own one on my own. So I didn't really see anything a decade ago. I suppose it was then probably 6 years ago that I would have identified, I suppose, what I saw as a gap in the market at that time. So when I had a Bespoke, which was an estate agents, we had a shop on Lower Bagot Street there. We had a lot of people calling in looking for office space because we were so centrally located. And from that, I was connecting these possible tenants with flexible workspace operators. And from that,
were there many in the marketplace at that time?
Yeah, there was quite a lot. I suppose it seems to be, a lot of people think it's a new phenomenon, but there's been a lot of people in Ireland that have been doing it for decades before me. But I suppose from getting that valuable feedback from connecting those people with the operators, I was getting people come back saying, oh, the places are too small, or they're too old, or they're not vibrant enough. So I was getting a lot of these feedback, and then I was finding there was nowhere that I could refer them to. So from there, I suppose I needed additional space for my own estate agency business, and I found a lovely building on Lower Bagot Street, but I only needed a couple of the rooms.
Now, did you know about this sort of office space renting as such?
Yeah, so I would have only known it. I had never worked in it, but I had known it because I was referring these tenants into flexible workspace operators. So I kind of understood what was happening in the sector.
It's sort of hot desking, isn't it?
Well, this would have been more at that stage, less kind of open plan spaces and hot desking, and more in office at that stage.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So when I would have took that building, then I would have just took a couple of offices for myself, put in a boardroom, refurbished the building, and I think before we had even opened the building, I had the entire building let, and that was really just.
You bought the building then?
So we would operate just a leasing model. Yeah, kind of similar to a lot of the hotel models, and I think the fact that it was all rented before we moved in was kind of testament that the model worked. And
how did they find out? I mean,
so
was it word of mouth?
I had the estate agency practice, so I was obviously advertising offices through that anyway. Right. So I had a little insider knowledge there, and so we were in the office game, so to speak, but not as an operator, more as just as a typical estate agent. So we were just advertising the properties in the normal way across the platforms, or people coming into the shop.
What's your typical tenant? I mean, is that what you call them, a tenant or a client?
Yeah, well, more client we would call them, or members. So I suppose there is no typical. So we would have a lot of the large technology companies that you would know when you think of Ireland would be our clients, but that would be on the larger side, and on the smaller side would be right down to just one person indigenous companies who maybe left our company and were setting up on their own, and then literally everything in between.
Actually, Joe, is that something that's changed in the last 5 years or thereabouts? Because about 5 or 6 years ago, there was certainly a perception that it was startups or small businesses that went into co-working spaces, or if it was an Irish-based employee of an international company. Whereas now you're letting quite significant amount of space to the same company, so they're not necessarily small businesses at all that are your members at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair to say. For a lot of operators, they focus on particular parts of the market. For us, community is all about just having it diverse as possible. So we're not focused on any particular sector, but definitely we would see that as a trend. I think certainly in the last couple of years, a lot more corporates swinging towards making flexible workspace a part of their real estate portfolio. It depends on the company what percentage that should take up, but they're definitely looking at it as part of their portfolio, which they can then contract when times are bad, and then expand when times are good, or when they have projects that they might need to kind of tool up for.
But is there a difficulty when a trend looks like it's working? There's almost a difficulty there that you can make it look easy. So I do believe there's operators out there in the Dublin market and otherwise that think it's all just about opening a large office and allocating space, whereas there's so much more behind it. So can you maybe give us some insights from the operational side of running these offices and these centres?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I can give you one example. So we're opening a new building on Thomas Street at the moment. It's due to open this month, called the Masonry. Like, that building has been in the planning stages internally within the company for the last 3 years. It's been on site, I would say, maybe the last 6 to 9 months.
Is this your first office outside of Dublin too?
Currently, it would be our only office outside of Dublin too. Yeah, so we've been essentially.
Well, there's reasons for that, obviously.
Yeah, well, the reason is that a lot of our clients, we would be at the higher end of the market, and a lot of our clients really they just want to be in the city centre.
Sure.
That's what their staff want. That's what they expect, and they want to be close to transport links and amenities. So we've been just trying to deliver what the clients have been looking for. More recently, we've actually had quite a number of tenants that we saw the flow towards Dublin 8, and I suppose we took the bet 3 years ago with our partner in the project that area was going to come on, and the changes on Thomas Street itself is phenomenal. There's a lot of well-known operators like the likes of Press Up or KC Peaches that have all spilled onto the street. So I suppose we saw that wave of what was coming, and I suppose we bet on it. But a lot of people think you just go in and you fit out a building in 10 weeks and you open the doors and that's it done. So I suppose that one's an example of where we're in the weeds for the last 3 years.
Which give us an idea now what you provide. I mean, you obviously provide the desk and the chair.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll provide co-working space, which can be kind of like a gym membership. So you can come in, you can sit wherever you want. There's desks, there's lounge areas and kitchen facilities, so you can just come in and work from wherever you want. We also do dedicated desks, so that's a fixed desk with your own piece of lockable storage that nobody else can sit at. And then we
Wi-Fi,
would
obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And then obviously private offices, meeting rooms and event spaces.
No phones, I take it, obviously.
Yeah, we can do whatever the client wants, we'll do it. So from whether it's phones and furniture, artwork, through to full custom builds. So we've done custom builds for company as large as 300 workstations, so 300 desks. So complete design if they want specific offices or artwork or particular floor finishes to fall in line with their international brand standards. Whatever they need, we'll do.
So what about the freelance engineer, or the freelance journalist, or the freelance whatever who just wants to pop in for a day or two and then move on somewhere else to another city, another country maybe? Those facilities are there as well? Yeah,
for sure. So there's different memberships akin to a gym, I suppose. So we can do your full-time always on membership, or your more flexible shall we say part-time memberships, and then you can just pay for one-off day passes as well. So it's kind of a completely flexible arrangement depending on what best suits the client.
Okay, Joe, while I have you in studio, I have to talk about one of what I think is synonymous with Iconic Offices, and that is the design. Okay. I think the design across the suite of Iconic Offices offering is something that really hasn't been seen or wasn't seen in the Dublin market before. So can you talk to me a little bit about the design side of things?
Yeah, I can try. So I think it falls back to when I was getting that feedback right at the very outset. That was when we were starting to see the Facebooks and the Googles come through with their office design, and there was a lot of, let's say, predominantly technology companies that wanted the same feeling for their company, but obviously didn't have the capital to do it or the size of property to do it. So I think it was taking that and then taking, I suppose, my kind of interest in design as well, and just really trying to build out spaces that I'd love to work from. Well, the first one I did work from, so build out spaces that I'd love to be in, my company would love to be in, and then I just said, if I'm willing to put my own money into it, I bet there's going to be 10 or 20 or 30 people in behind me that are also going to back it with their money. And that was the strategy from the very outset, and I suppose it continues to work to this day, albeit that there's a few other people trying to replicate it and a few other companies coming in from outside of Ireland also stepping up the game.
And actually, again, that's something that's topical at the moment. We've spoken about Talent Garden and WeWork and others opening in Dublin. How are you finding the increased competition, and by the way, from international and indigenous companies in this space?
Yeah, it's coming from all sides at the moment, but I think the international, I think, to be honest, the more people that come in, the better. It's going to just grow. The sector is going to grow exponentially this year with the arrival of the international competitors which are coming in, which for us as an indigenous player is a good thing. I think we're just repositioning our place in the market to ensure that we can kind of capitalise on that. So particularly the larger international companies have a particular price point and part of the market that they like to hit. So they're going to suck a lot of new companies into the funnel, convert a lot of companies from conventional space into flexible workspace, and we just want to be there when they want to progress out of that operator's offering, that we're there and ready to take them up. So when you see a sector grow with such significance, there's a lot of opportunities in that, and I suppose it's just up to the indigenous company who knows the streets best to capitalise on that.
Okay, so where do you see future trends? Like, where is this going? Because you might be familiar with recent news on WeWork, and certainly their funding model and finances have come under scrutiny in recent weeks. So where do you see, from an Irish perspective, and particularly across the main urban areas, where do you see the trend of co-working going?
Yeah, well, I suppose co-working and flexible workspace is here to stay, that's for sure. I think one of the main drivers behind that is that if you're looking to rent an office in Dublin city centre, which might be conventional space, the landlord's typically looking for 12 to 15 years term certain, so no break options within 12 to 15 years.
Is that still market standard?
Yeah, that's still market standards. Like, we're looking at properties and they're the terms that you're looking at with a fairly strong covenant. So that's what's happening in the city centre, and for most companies, they don't know where they're going to be in 3 or 4 years, never mind 10 or 12 years. So I suppose from that one point in the Irish market shows that a lot of people just want the flexibility to be able to adapt as their business needs and not as their landlord requires.
Okay, but is it a landlord requirement or is it the landlord's bank's requirement?
It would be both. So it would be, I suppose, what's good for one is good for the other, to be honest, in reality. So look, it's nobody's fault. It's their job to capitalise on their asset, which they've obviously put a lot of money into, and that is their business is to get the longest possible term.
Just from the point of view of listeners listening in now at the moment, what type of business person should we say? Would it be a startup person that doesn't want to particularly invest in 4 walls and a floor, or is it what type of person is best for your type of business?
So, who we would strategically chase after would be FDI. So foreign direct investment coming into Ireland.
Okay.
So that would be kind of first and foremost who we'd be targeting. So there'd be a lot of the larger West Coast technology companies using Ireland as their springboard into Europe.
Home base.
So that would be our first tier. Then you would have your larger indigenous companies, large Irish companies, and then you would have your smaller kind of startup. So the answer is, not to avoid the question, there is no typical makeup, and I suppose
what I'm trying to ask you is would it be economical for the small businessman to
100%.
Yep.
Very economical. So
as opposed to investing in his own and renting.
If we talk money on it, if we talk dollars and cents for a moment on it, if we have someone who's thinking about setting up their own business and they're looking for a workspace, they can come in, take a co-working membership, come in 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. There is free beer, free coffee, they get their breakfasts are free, and it's like €295 per month.
Joe, I feel like these questions have gone beyond an interview and more for an inquiry here. Brian, are you thinking of moving base?
Well, no, not quite. No, I was just trying to ascertain how best the small businessman could be entertained by yourself in terms of office accommodation.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
a person, should I say?
Yeah, for those people who are just looking to get a base as quickly as possible, it lets them get established literally immediately at a very low cost point.
So it's here to stay.
That is for sure,
basically speaking.
And I think the trend suggests it, and I think it's what the occupiers want.
Your future expectations then for Iconic and the future?
That's a good question. I think we've got 2 buildings which we're opening kind of over the course of the next 3 months, which will see us increase the size of the business by 50%. So that is what we're focusing front and foremost. Yeah. And then we're working on our next set of buildings here in Dublin. So
can you tell us where the second one is, or the first one's the masonry?
So the masonry, which is on Thomas Street, just stone's throw from Christchurch there, and the other one is on South Richmond Street, directly opposite the Bernard Shaw pub. So just
excellent.
Off Harcourt Road.
Great. And the one in Thomas Street, that's due to open this month?
Yeah, opening this month.
What are the interiors like? Because I know that's is it a protected or a listed building?
Yeah, so it's beyond the building register. It's not a fully listed building, but you're looking at a historical Victorian building to the front and then a brick and beam warehouse to the rear. So it's a really unusual space, and the attention to detail on the interiors is excellent.
Can you give us a hint of what we can expect then? Have you carried the history of the building into the interior?
Yeah, no, definitely. So we always respect the interior architecture, and we love old buildings. I think that's one of our speciality, and I think that really comes through in the interior. So you'll have to come in and check it out.
Listen, thank you so much for coming in, and we must arrange a tour to go visit the masonry. And if anybody is looking for a co-working space across Dublin 2 and now indeed Dublin 8, contact Iconic Offices.
Broadcasting to South Dublin on 93.9. This is Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM with Bryan Fox and myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com.
Okay, well, our next guest now is Will O'Reilly. He's owner of Domavue. I've got that right?
Domavue, yes.
Domavue, okay. So, well, thank you for joining us and coming into the studio, Will. Now, most of us associate virtual reality with war games, but you're using it for other uses. Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, it really does suit the gaming industry, all right. What we're using it for is residential property, mostly, but also commercial property, museums, industrial properties. So very much what we're concentrated on is interior spaces.
Okay, you put the mask on then and so forth, do you? Or?
You can do, yes. So
how does it work? Just explain to viewers, or to listeners, excuse me.
Yes.
How it works.
So we have a special camera. It has 3 cameras. It has 3 distance meters and 3 scanners. The cameras are the easy part of it, but basically it spins around and it takes photographs, and it takes like what's called a point cloud. It builds up a map of the entire space that you're shooting, and then you move it around, and anywhere you move it to within a space, then a person can look at.
Okay, very good.
And then once it's ready, it takes us usually, like a normal sized house, it takes us 1 to 2 hours to shoot. Usually takes us 24 hours to turn around. Once it's finished, it's ready to view on a mobile phone, on an iPad, any device really. And then you can take your mobile phone and you can put it into VR mode. So if you have a headset, you just click a special button and you stick it into the headset. It can be a simple or a more intricate headset, and you put that on.
And our estate agents using this now, who is a typical user for it now?
Yeah, so we have a lot of estate agents who work with us, and like some homeowners come to us directly, some builders, so for new developments they'll come to us, for new developments they might have 4 or 5 different types of houses or apartments, so we'll maybe shoot all of them or maybe shoot 3 of them.
So I go into this office and I can see then exactly how the whole layout is of the building.
Yeah, you can look at it on your phone, so it's integrated into Daft, integrated into My Home. We can give people the embed codes for their own websites, whether that's the estate agent's website themselves or whether it's the developer's website of that. Like if it's a big development, they'll have that.
And how's it developing? Is it becoming popular with users at the moment?
It's becoming very popular. So we've had the technology here in Ireland for about 4.5 years. It's been in the United States before that, like maybe about 6 years. So we're lagging a little bit behind them, and it's really starting to gain traction now, especially in new developments, because I suppose there's the marketing budget for it there. But as people are seeing it, as there's more exposure to it, then people, I suppose, buyers are asking for it, and it's becoming more of a ubiquitous thing.
Okay, it's interesting to know that buyers are asking that they're actually looking to view properties in this way, because it doesn't surprise me at all that property developers are very forward thinking, because they understand their asset class and their market. With estate agents, they seem to be a little bit slow to use this technology, given that it is so readily available. Has that been in your experience?
It's. I suppose they're working. A lot of estate agents are very positive about it. We have found, I suppose, if they're trying to get an instruction from a homeowner selling their property, it's a big ask to ask them to spend, €300 to €400 more on more marketing material, which this is. Now, we would say the value of it really does pay back in
sounds super. It really does.
So just as regards to get people to drive some people to see the property, to generate excitement around it, but also to get more people bidding on a property. It really has proved very effective.
Yeah, look, it's absolutely the way I think that consumers want to be able to or house hunters want to be able to shortlist properties. So I think I mentioned before, we tend to consider this technology for people who are living outside of Ireland and house hunting back in Ireland. But the reality is, even if you're sitting in Dublin, you don't particularly want to spend half an hour, 45 minutes in traffic after a long day work and try to get parking in order to view a property. So in fact, it's a great way for maybe house hunters to take a look at a property, see is it really something they want to look at. And one of the criticisms I think of virtual reality, somebody said that it's not the same as walking through, and actually I take the view that you're right, it's not the same as walking through, because you're doing it in the privacy of your own home, you're not being watched, you can linger on things like the skirting boards or the architrave or elements like that, so
on your laptop.
You can really view in your own time. So I see this as a superb way, and in fact, after working as a buyer's agent and a house hunter for almost a decade, I can utterly see the value, and I wish this was available back then when I was doing that, as opposed to driving to Portlaoise or Westport or wherever it was.
Can I just ask you, how did you get involved, Joe? I'm really sorry, Will. How did you come up with the idea yourself? Did you?
So it's a technology that I just researched. It was introduced to me by a friend.
It was introduced to you?
Yeah, and it wasn't available here at the time.
Was it not? This is 4.5 years ago.
We went to the States and procured it there and brought it back here. We kind of had a free run at the market for a good while.
And did you have any difficulty educating, shall we say, users in terms of how to use it and how it can benefit their business? I don't know how costly it is, but I mean, obviously it makes economic sense to use it.
I suppose it's a difficult thing to talk about, to describe. It's you have to get it in front of people and get them using it. It's very intuitive once it's in front of you.
It's like the car, isn't it? You have to see the car and get into it and feel it.
And that's the way people expect things these days. With Apple have changed the way that devices don't come with instructions anymore. Right. You open up a virtual tour and you can walk around straight away. It's like Google Street View inside. So people know to tap the screen and they go walking around. There's a dollhouse view then to see the whole property in 3D. Just to come back to buyers and stories that we get back is from estate agents that buyers will separate. Say a couple will separate on a Saturday morning because they might have 5 properties they want to see, so they'll walk around the property with their phone, videoing it, so that they can remind themselves of what it looked like, but also they can show their spouse later on, and then they decide, okay, we'll go and see that again or something. And
so as in they're taking a divide and conquer approach to these open viewings on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, because there's no virtual tour, so
it's like Hunger Games.
Yes.
So this solves a lot of problems for buyers. Just to so many of them that I've met have gone, wow, why isn't this on every property? It would save us so much time, and we could just really hone in on 1 or 2 properties and start bidding on them.
Which would really actually save the estate agents time on holding an excessive number of open viewings or trying to accommodate an additional number of viewings. Because if people saw, you still have a scenario where, people will arrive at a house and once they walk through the hallway, they know it's not right for them. Yeah. They'll go through the motions of walking through the house, but by their face, by the body language, the estate agent knows this person is not a fan of the property. And that's exactly the kind of thing that you would know if you actually were able to access a virtual reality tour. Have we any idea of what proportion of properties on the market at the moment have this facility available?
In Ireland it would be less than 5%, maybe something like 2%. Yes, it is pretty low. So
is there much competition? And I mean, have you got the market yourself then?
There's a bit of competition. Mainly we have the market, I suppose, because we were early because we have some partnerships with. We do a feature for the Journal, which is sponsored by the KBC. It's KBC's Experience Your World.
This is the online
project.
Newspaper,
So it's a feature of our property every week. So we know all the estate agents.
So you've the know-how, in other words,
through that, and I suppose we started with very, very intricate property. So we've shot the Natural History Museum in Dublin, which is massive, and it's got lots of features which are very difficult for this type of system to shoot. So we have a lot of learnings and a lot of.
Sorry, the Natural History Museum.
Yeah.
I visited that last year for the first time in decades. It's fabulous. I've been telling everybody to go visit. So is there a virtual tour of that?
On their website, you can see all 4 floors. So the second floor is there's no wheelchair access to the second floor. There's and the 2 balcony levels above that, there's no access for anybody because the balconies are a little bit too low. There's some fire safety issues. There's a dodo up there, which you can see in virtual reality now. So that's good.
And is the virtual reality tour of the upper floors as well?
Yes.
Because I'm not going to get anybody into trouble, but I happened to get a tour of only because I had my very cute godson with me, and he really wanted to see a penguin, so we were given access. Given access to see the penguin. So I'm going to look at that tour.
You could be in the travel business as well, couldn't you? With this type of.
We've started again. It's in beta still at the moment. It's a website called Dublin3D.com where we're populating a map of Dublin with tourist spots. So we've, there's the Guinness Storehouse in there. Just shot. It's not on that yet, but we just shot it last night. The Trinity, the Long Hall in Trinity, the library.
But any tourist would love to see the Natural History Museum.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I'm just thinking.
There's the Archaeology Museum, the 1916 exhibition in the Decorative Arts Museum as well. We've shot that.
Will, are you involved in the Smart Dublin or Smart Docklands? They have an ongoing program. It's an open source program at the moment where they're essentially mapping Dublin City. Are you involved in that?
No.
I definitely recommend you go along and take a look at what they're doing because they have a number of collaborators all coming together to map Dublin City. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting. So you have a situation because it's open source that there can be layering on it.
Great.
So I definitely recommend anybody in the VR space to go along.
Carol may have put it to you earlier on, but do you think is there a reluctance by estate people, at whatever size they might be, corporate or residential, to take on your service?
I thought that at first, I suppose, where everybody wants to have as much control as they can around the process, and apparently years ago floor plans were too much information to be giving out. This is a lot of information to be giving out to the public, but so many estate agents have embraced it.
What sort of information?
Well, as regards to controlling the narrative around a property, where people can, if they walk around themselves, they're not being told about the area or
I see. Yes, so they have to find out for themselves in relation to.
Well, I think they do anyway. Yeah, you've got Street View, so this is the interior version of that. It's what people want these days. Is what people expect. People are digital natives of all ages, really. So,
but the consumer will obviously do the research anyway, despite whether it's on physically walking around or.
Well, they'll still go and see the property. This is the thing. But for an estate agent, they get pre-qualified leads. They get really well qualified leads through the door.
Right.
They're not wasting their own time. They're not wasting the time of the homeowner staging the property every single Saturday. That's where people really do get annoyed if it goes on and on. So it's it has been embraced. It's just a matter of it. I think estate agents convincing homeowners that they need to outlay a little bit more and that it will come back to them in
with
spades.
the pressure on home buyers to look at properties as well. I mean, they have to look at a wide range of properties now before they can find one.
Yeah,
in this market.
People's time is limited.
Also, earlier in the week, actually, there was a report that properties at the upper end of the market in Dublin are really the upper end of the market is quite stagnant. So, in fact, this might be a way for sellers, if their property has been sitting on the market, to separate themselves from the pack and do something a little bit special, especially for homeowners when they know their property has something a little bit special to offer, whether it's a double height entryway or whatever special features. It's a way to really showcase those special features.
Okay, well, thanks so much for coming in. That was Will O'Reilly, owner of Domavue. As I say, Will, thanks for coming in and being with us on the show on Property Matters today. And that's it from us in studio today. Thank you for joining us on Property Matters show, where property matters. You can get in touch with the show by but that's that shouldn't be that's a typing glitch we have there, Carol.
Okay, listen, we want to thank all of our guests for being with us on the show today. Next week we'll be speaking to Jason Denham, owner of the new Irish branch of kitchen design and installation business Schmidt. So a quick reminder to listeners that CETA, that's the Construction IT Alliance, have a seminar on immersive technologies for the construction industry at 8 a.m. tomorrow. That's happening down at Bank of Ireland Grand Canal Place. So check the CETA website to see if there's tickets still available. Also, the Executive Summit takes place in Clontarf Castle this Friday and will feature a joint housing panel from the public and private sector. So I will be out of the country myself next week, so Gavin Gallagher of PropTech TV will keep my seat warm next week. But for now, thanks to Shane Flynn, who was on sound, producer Katie Tallon, and we'll be back at the same time next week. Stay tuned for Bowl of Soul, which is coming up. So from Bryan Fox and myself, Carol Tallon, have a good week.